Welcome to Rebarchek University. From Canada to Germany. Thanks for joining me. As the Pope of Podcasting, I take your viewership seriously, but I especially take your intellect seriously. Thanks for joining me. What do I have for you today? Well, first a prayer blessing, and then because I feel like I've been hit by a bolt of lightning, I'm going to interrupt my current series to offer some reflections on the year 2020. A year that saw America make an enormous swerve off the paved highway. But there was a lightning bolt that struck me. What was it? A New York Times email news feed on the general righteousness of 2020. Smacked me in the head, it did. First, I want to offer a few remarks about my team. Danielle and Chris, Kareth and Jessica and Nathan down in Remember the Alamo land. Joe over in the crossroads of America. Katie down there in roasting Tucson. Dunka. It's true, I'm so appreciative of all you Patreon supporters. I couldn't and wouldn't produce the podcast without you, so again, my gratitude. Excuse me, Professor Yu, I think it's pronounced Tucson. Hey, my listener, do you want to stand behind a reluctant prophet? One who's crying out into the wilderness? You do? Go to Patreon, Patreon, and make a $20, $30, $40 a month pledge. Not only is that a way to support a bald theologian, it's a way to get involved in Christian mission. Hey, you've probably seen it. The feds keep raising the interest rates to quell inflation, but it's not working, not even. One key indicator is home sales. Yeah, according to the National Association of Realtors Index, home sales fell 7.1% in August. Mortgage rates are now above 7%. Mortgage rates haven't been this high since 2002. But the high interest rates not only affect new home buyers, they hang a millstone on folks who want to move and flee laterally elsewhere, because they too are stymied by the crushing expense. But it's not just mortgages. Wages are going down exactly when prices are going up. The Heritage Organization reports that coffee is up 21% since 2021. Heating your home, that's gone up 63% since January 21. Electricity up 22%. A gallon of gas has exploded up 54% since 2021. Well, me, I'm happy to report that I've discovered a coping mechanism. Yep. Every time I go to the grocery store, I carry with me my own pair of defibrillation paddles. I even put a I Heart Jesus sticker on the box. Yeah, I walk up, unload my plastic basket, and while the cashier begins to ring me up, out of my backpack I pull the defibrillator paddles and the generator. I bought all that online. And while she's ringing me up, I explain to her how to use the electrified paddles. And then, when she announces my total of $114 for 9 whole items, a tub of oatmeal has more than doubled over the last 4 years. I like oatmeal, don't like that it's more than doubled. When I collapse, I hand her my defib paddles, and then I collapse on the cold cement floor and I wait for her to apply the paddles to my chest and shock my cold body back into consciousness. It's that bad. Knowing all that, my listener, let me pray God's blessing for you. Our Father, whose glorious throne is in heaven, we praise your name. As hard as life can be, we're alive. Thank you for the gift of life. Thank you for healthy lungs, hearts that pump blood, eyes to see, arms with which to hug. And still, Abba, even Jesus prayed, give us our daily bread. Ultimately we depend upon your grace. So today, Holy Spirit, I pray for each and every viewer. Open the floodgates of provision, Lord. Provide for their basic, essential economic needs. Bring in help for medical bills, for unexpected and unplanned expenses, things like a blown tire, a tooth with a cavity, a leaky roof. You, eternal God, own the cattle on 1,000 hills, so we come to you as the Lord and owner of all creation. Meet our need. Come through for us, King Jesus. Make a way for my viewer. Show them that you're still in the miracle working business. Amen, amen, amen. One quick businessy thing. My recent 3 months of videos are loading to Edmund Rebarchek's YouTube page, not the YouTube page. So if you're interested in the video version of the podcast, go to YouTube, Edmund Rebarchek, to get these videos. I'm so dumb. I'll get that fixed, but I'm such a technological nuthead. 2020 in the rearview mirror. Last week I opened up a New York Times e-news feed article by David Leonhardt about the year 2020. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, that while progressivism has made some important imprint on America's institutions, universities, Hollywood, the national media, he says it's mostly failed. Progressivism, he lamented, has not much impacted the average Jane on the street's life. Yeah, true, he said, the elites, politicians, actors, professors have bought into the glories of progressivism, and he noted specifically, for instance, that universities are now captured by identity politics. He wrote about how blacks are highlighted more now by media organizations, that 81 million made June 19th into a holiday. He even talked about how prestigious cultural awards now are consistently doled out to diverse folks. But the problem is, Leonhardt went on, progressivism hasn't been strategic enough, hasn't done enough to shape life for America's common schlubs. Mostly, he agonized, progressivism has been limited to shaping the symbolic over the concrete. And you guys, it was fascinating to read him sharing so openly about how progressivism is or is not, to his mind, shaping life here in the United States. And then the kicker line, the line that jumped off the page at me, was when he added, quote, "The spirit of 2020 was always a righteous spirit, and the people and organizations that powered that moment had legitimate grievances and moral demands," end quote. Guys, I read that line and I thought, now there's a thought piece for my show. 2020 was always a righteous spirit with legitimate moral demands? Queso sagrado. So yeah, indeed, let's look in the rearview mirror at what happened and why in 2020, and why that has in significant ways birthed a new church. Think with me, my friend. Why is progressivism so popular now to what? 50% of all Christians? Because for me, I realize that the world spirit will always be the world spirit. But it really concerns me when self-avowed Christians throw in with wokeness and throw in with godless progressivism. So again, it's been 3.5 years since the foment broke out in March of 2020. So let's look back at the what's and whys. I'll start by summarizing the events of the epic year 2020 this way. It was an election year where the polarizing Donald Trump was at issue. And then COVID broke early that winter. People were fear porn to the gills. The entire medical industry was thrown into disarray, and people no longer knew whom to allow into their own living rooms. And then the drug addict and convicted felon George Floyd, he had been convicted of pointing a gun at a pregnant woman, and he'd been arrested multiple times on cocaine charges. And the Washington Post, not the New York Post, but the Washington Post wrote of Floyd, quote, "From the day George Floyd moved to Texas as a child to the day he was killed in Minneapolis, the police were omnipresent in his life," close quote. George Floyd was killed and memorialized, of all places, at an Assemblies of God college. You can't make this stuff up. So, there was a media fomented outrage not only at police brutality, but authority in general. Remember, statues were being toppled, which is always a Marxist mainstay. You burn down history, that's important. Cities were enduring looting and rioting and burning and the turning of entire business districts into economic deserts. And I want to thank my friend Dave for that phrase, economic deserts. All of that was happening because of the rioting and looting. And to sum it up, it was mildly a catastrophic year. It was a major cultural earthquake. I did an entire series in the midst of 2020 entitled The Cult of the Now. I did 16 episodes, and my only regret is that I focused too much on the Marxist antecedents and foundations of what was going on, being vomited out onto the national landscape, and not enough on the novel neo-Marxist features. But woo-wee, what a year. And before I get to the rub, the nexus, the analysis of today's show, I'll just tell you that the progressivism of 2020 actually has deeply impacted this bald-headed schlub of a Spudlander. To your belief that wokeism hasn't gone far enough, Mr. Leonhardt, I've lost friends. I've had former warm, respectful, committed Christians who don't know me very well come on to my social media pages and scold me, defriend me. I've lost connections with extended family. Yeah, I had a couple of them accuse me of vile things. It was so weird. They hardly know me, and they're accusing me of being vile. And then closer to home, I actually am quite self-censoring about what I post on my own social media accounts. I don't want the FBI breaking through my door at 2 a.m. in the morning. I don't want to be arrested for conspiring against the government because I'm thinking and wondering what's going on and asking questions. I don't even want to be put on the radar for wrong speak or gulp, wrong thought. And that's not all what 2020 did to me, but I won't bore any New York Times readers further with how 2020 has altered my worldview. My concern is that 2020 caused an enormous ecclesial shift. A shift that last week, show 330, I described as like unto the 16th century Reformation. Entire denominations are being torn a new one, even though most are pretending it isn't happening, and even though most ecclesiarchs refuse to reflect openly about how the government-mandated lockdowns have brutalized their churches. And even though most refuse to strategize about what they're going to do the next riotous time we go around. But it's been weird because people, good, thoughtful, Bible reading, church going, morally upright, love your neighbor types of people, do right by your family folks, nice, oh my me, nice above all else people have turned on traditional Christianity. Weirdly, and probably without knowing it, they've entirely turned against biblical Christianity. What on earth happened? A neo-Christianity has arisen. And after Christ, Christianity has arisen. A post-biblical Christianity has been born, and with all of that, a post-truth Christianity has been delivered, kicking and screaming and bleeding onto the birthing table of history. It comes with its own dogmas, its own definitions of love and peace and salvation and the meaning of life. It's newly wired that in ways that have not been seen before in the church. And you know this, my friend. It comes with all the self-righteousness of a new sect. If you study church history across 2 millennia, sects were always at odds with the mainstream church. Sects insist on their distinctions, on their new moral righteousness, and the post-2020 ecclesial sects, they are red-hot angry at the 2 millennia old church, and I mean smoking hot. And that self-righteousness, that moral imperiosity, belonging to a moral cause, It is deeply alluring, attractive. Me? Just by my feelings? I don't have to get off my couch and I can belong to a moral cause? That's dope, man. People are drawn like ants to peanut butter. To think of what's been going on out in my garage. I've killed 18 mice over the last 3 weeks. I use those old Victor traps. I bait them with peanut butter, right? And when the mice don't get to them, the ants do. The ants come in there and clean that peanut butter off. And that's what you get when you live near thousands of acres of farmland. You get mices in your garage. People are drawn out of their banal lives to a curated cause, a moral cause, a historic cause. Mucho gusto. That's as savory as Cracker Barrel. How'd it happen? How'd it happen? Epic national emotionalism, fear porning, hate mongering, brainwashing, soul restructuring, all woven through with what for most once were sincere Christ-like emotional responses, right? People were really concerned. Where's the love in all this? Who's looking out for the dispossessed? How can this be happening? Again, I really think that the majority of those folks who've fallen in for today's post-2020 neo-Christianity were folks who truly meant well. And given the abject silence of church leaders in and through the year of 2020, wait, wait, I'm still processing. Did you really say that an Assemblies of God college hosted the George Floyd Memorial Service? Bloody hell. No, I didn't make that up. Where there are vacuums, things will rush in to fill them. Given no pastoral cues from the pulpit how to process the epic events of 2020, tens of millions of church folk readily took their cues from culture. They went on to agree with things like the police are evil, or actually you are selfish and ugly if you don't wear a mask while riding alone in your car. They agreed. What would Jesus do? Prefer others over himself and get an injection? Or 2 or 3 if that makes other feel people, or be selfish? No, he'd get 2 or 3 injections. People agreed. Maybe I am a closet racist. Maybe without ever having thought about it or worked through it or even have friends like that, maybe I am a closet homophobe. I mean, everyone feels I am. And deeper still, they thought, maybe the Bible's wrong. O.M. God, maybe the Bible was, as it turns out, wrong. You guys, warped ideas rush in to fill reason vacuums. Vacuums that are created by an overwrought emotionalism, especially when no in-the-moment wisdom is offered. And given the abject silence of church leaders, Protestant, Catholic, and Eastern Orthodox, through 2020 and now these years after, otherwise good-hearted folks were overwhelmed by the fear-porning and emotionalism of 2020. And so, they flipped. They've embraced a neo-Christianity. It's a new Christianity. And we're in the middle of another 16th century Reformation. Here's the dealio. I see it, sense it, encounter it all over social media from folks I once knew as committed Christians. They're saying, could the Bible be wrong? Maybe the Bible was just its own cultural bound text when it said that sexual intercourse outside of marriage was a violation of God's will. Maybe Jesus never actually taught anything contrary to homosexual relations. Maybe the Bible, golly, just like my urban pastor put it, maybe the Bible missed an enormous point by not focusing on racism. Maybe the Bible is so old that it could not offer any advice for when we're going through an election year media fear-porn hysteria. Is that possible? You see, my friend, these formerly committed, faithful Christians, in their hearts, They were confronted by questions. And they exited 2020 with new perspectives, timely, zeitgeistian perspectives. And unfortunately, those perspectives inculcate a raging sense of self-righteousness. I'll bet you watching me today have endured the seething wrath of those who now embrace these fresh perspectives, no? But let me go back. Peter Heck, in a new Not the Bee article, writes that, quote, the road to apostasy begins with a 4-word question. Just 4 words. Did God really say? Did God really say humanity was created 2 sexes, male and female? Did God really say that touching little girls and boys was a violation of his commands? 4 constant words. Did God really say? Genesis 3:1. Did God really say Jesus was the only means of salvation? Did God really say that he hates sin? Heck said, apostasy always starts with 4 words. Did God really say? Here's the deal. Satan operates in time-proven ways. He never utters straight-up falsehoods. He never inserts insane non-truths. There's always a big tidbit of truth or love woven through his questions. You know this. He always comes as an angel of light. Always comes asking questions that seem reasonable and timely and commonsensical. Your government would never lie to you. Elected by the people, aren't they there to serve the people? However, 2 consenting people, even if they're children, however 2 consenting people want to love one another is none of your business, right? Jesus would never resist getting untested injections, right? I mean, after all, he said to turn the other cheek, so why wouldn't he offer up his other arm? All those questions have an element of truth or a grain of love woven through them. Here's a Noza question that has deceived good-hearted folks. I've heard it for 3 or 4 decades now. Aren't the oppressed by nature more noble and deserving of more rights and privileges than the rest of us? Right, my friend? I mean, just who's in favor of oppressing still further the oppressed? But there are necessary follow-up questions, questions that should have been asked for decades on end, asked and answered in 1,001 pulpits across the United States, or 100,001 pulpits across the United States. Questions like, does God show partiality based on economics? Does God view people through the lens of class? Should we? Does God in the Bible give any indication that he views people through the lens of race? Does the Bible anywhere teach us to view one another, particularly through the lens of race? Does the Bible teach that being poor directly equals or equates to salvation? All important biblical questions. Or on still a more mundane line, questions should have been asked like, what if the oppressed are actually tools? Tools being used for the power brokers. What if we're watching weaponized classes of people by which power brokers manipulate the rest of it? Is it, oh no, is it possible that we're being played? Is it, oh my me, is it possible that the so-called oppressed are themselves being played for someone else's gain? Could it be that deep, that sinister? Well, I think that such critical mindedness, asking such biblically driven questions, all of that reveals something resoundingly critical. 2020 was not, in fact, driven by a sense of righteousness. And I'm not saying people, millions of heartfelt Christians, didn't feel a sense of righteousness. They did. I'm saying that 2020 was not based in righteous motives. No, it was based in deceit. At root, the narratives, all of them were lies. To wit, COVID was not even close to being as deadly as they lied to us. The real numbers were intentionally pumped up to fear porn us. Well, and to steal billions and billions of dollars. And yeah, COVID was an infectious mess. But no, it wasn't the horror show that the media and the CDC made it out to be. There wasn't a single moral or righteous element to how the flip-flopping CDC and our politicians handled COVID. Here's another lie. That there's widespread racism among whites. That's statistically absurd. This is a narrative, a woke narrative used to leverage a power grab. That white people work a widespread racism, systemic racism, systemic racism, systemic racism. Saying that and teaching that is a way to muzzle the sheep. It's a way to brainwash school children. It's mostly a way to divide. And so it's a demonic narrative. There's not one iota about it that is righteous. What about police brutality? Well, I noted this data 3 years ago. The Washington Post reported that in all of 2019, the year preceding the summer-long national rioting, there were 25 unarmed whites and 14 unarmed blacks who were shot and killed by police across the United States for the entire year of 2019. Those numbers are tiny compared to the numbers of whites who killed unarmed whites, or the numbers of blacks who killed unarmed blacks, civilians. And obviously, it would not be the case that all of those 39 total police killings or 14 unarmed black killings, it's not the case that all of those police killings were unjustified. And look, please, in no way do I want to diminish the pain of those police killings or the killing of those 14 blacks by the police. But last time I checked, 14 do not equate to universal police brutality everywhere. So the notion that the police are roaming the streets looking for blacks to kill, it's a vile bumper sticker. Not one thing is righteous about it, not one. You guys, 2020 was a curated reality. The media curated narratives. They blew up factoids. They used graphic, fear-porning imagery. They straight up lied, all to curate a reality from which our nation in general, and oh my, the church in specific, has yet to recover. Millions of people in the church have allowed their faith to be led into terminal absurdity. The media curated the COVID hysteria. The media curated police brutality hysteria. The media curated the lying narrative that it was a pure and legitimate election process that year. Those were all lies. 2020, driven by a righteous spirit with moral concerns, couldn't be more of a demonic lie. Allow me to be theological for a moment. Righteousness presupposes a fixed center. Righteousness presupposes established definitions of good and evil, holy foundations by which good and evil are assessed and sifted. But wokeism is a cult of the now. The definitions and foundations of what's good or evil shift monthly. Hell, sometimes they shift weekly. And actually, it's impossible for wokeism to be righteous, since it not only doesn't believe in God, but hates the very God who's the source of all righteousness. An emotional response is not righteous if the thing it is responding to is itself a lie, right? A mom is not righteous if she spanks her toddler for something that the toddler didn't do, even if what she felt the toddler didn't do was evil. A family's not righteous if it shoots their Doberman for presumably having killed the family Siamese cat, even if the family dearly loved the now dead family cat. Emotions are not themselves righteous. They are righteous when they respond to factual evil. But a curated evil? That's not righteous. A curated mob hysteria? I'm sorry, Virginia. Even millions of people can collectively be wrong. And 2020, it showed us that tens of millions can, in unison, lose their minds. And worse, 2020 showed us, holy God, that tens of millions can collectively lose their Christian faith. Thanks for thinking with me. Thanks for allowing me to interrupt my normal series. I'm honored to have you join me. Please, until next week, everyone, go and turn on your beautiful God-given brains.